All right, now let's take a look at my solution. So in movies component, here in the render method, just above our table, I have added this link to /movies/new. I've applied a couple of bootstrap classes to make it look like a button. And also there is an inline style to add a bit of margin. This is purely a temporary solution. In the future, we can come back and revisit this. Now, let's take a look at our movie form. So as we can see, this movie form extends our form class. In the state, we have data. Here in the data, we have title, genre ID, number in stock, and daily rental rate. Note that here, I've called this second property genre ID because this is specifically the ID of a genre, not the entire genre object with ID and name. So when the user selects a genre here, all we care about is the genre ID. That's why I've specifically called this property genre ID. Here we also have genres, which I have initialized to an empty array. Later, as you will see, in component.mount, we'll get the genres from our imaginary server. And we also have errors just like before. Now let's take a look at our schema. So we have underline ID, which is a string. I didn't set this to required because when creating a new movie, we don't have the ID property. I've set title to a string. It's required. Pretty basic. Genre ID is the same. Number in stock and daily rental rate, they're both numbers and they have a range. So number in stock is minimum 0 and maximum 100. So pretty straightforward. Next, let's take a look at component.mount. So first we get genres from our fake genre service and then update the state. Next, we'll read the ID parameter in the route and store it in a constant called movie ID. If that equals to new, we'll return immediately because we don't need to populate the form with an existing movie object. So if the ID is not new, we'll get the movie with the given ID. The chances are that movie does not exist. So we need to check for that. So if it doesn't exist, we're going to redirect the user to /notfound. Note that here, instead of using history.push, I have used history.replace, because if you use history.push, when the user clicks the back button, they will get back to this page with an invalid movie ID. And then again, they will get automatically redirected to the not found page. So they will end up in an infinite loop. They can never click the back button to go back to where they used to be. Also, note that I have used the return keyword here, so the rest of this code in this method will not be executed. Don't assume that just because we are redirecting the user somewhere else, the rest of this method will not be executed. You can do a console.log and see whatever you write here will be executed. So here basically we are updating the state, we're setting the data property, but we are not setting that to the movie object we get from the server. This is a very typical real-world scenario because the RESTful APIs that we have on the server are general purpose. They are not built for a specific page. So the data that they return is often used on several pages. Now each page needs a piece of that data, and it is also possible that what we want to display on the page is a little bit different from the structure of that data. So that's why I've defined this method here, map to view model. So this method gets a movie object that we get from the server and maps it to a different kind of movie object that we can use on this form. We refer to that kind of movie as a view model. It's a model for the view. So here basically we are returning a new object, and look at our transformation. We're setting ID to movie.id, title the same, but we don't have a genre property here. We have genre ID, which is mapped to movie.genre.id. So the movies that we get from the server, they are hierarchical. They have nested properties. They have more data than what we need. So here we only need the genre ID. That's why we're mapping it to movie.genre.id. And similarly, we're mapping number in stock and daily rental rate. Pretty straightforward. Let's move on. Here is our doSubmit method. So when the form is submitted, we call the save movie function. This is another function in our fake movie service. So we give it our movie object, our view model, which looks exactly like what you see here. So we save the movie and then redirect the user to /movies. Pretty straightforward, except that I have defined a new method in our base class. So previously we implemented render input. Now I have implemented render select, which basically renders a drop-down list with this name, with this label, and these options. Let's take a quick look here. So I'm going to go to the form component. Let's search for render select. Very, very similar to what we have built before. So I've defined a new component called select, and here I'm initializing that component, setting name, value, label, options, as well as onChange and error. So the job of these helper methods like render select, render input is to return the right component and hook into the onChange event. Without these helper methods, we have to manually set onChange every time. Now, if you look at the implementation of select, again, it's pretty self-explanatory. So just like the input, we have a div with the class form group, we have a label, but instead of an input, we have a select. Below that, we have an empty option, and then we'll map all the options that we get into option elements. Now, you could argue that what we have here is a little bit similar to what we have in our input component. So in both these components, we have this div with the class form group, we have a label, and then after that, we have an alert. So you might be wondering why I didn't refactor that component and conditionally render a different kind of input depending on the type. That would certainly work, but if you look at other kinds of inputs like checkboxes and radio buttons in Bootstrap, you will realize that those fields don't quite match this structure. So if you want to support those kind of input fields, then you will end up with a lot of if, else. That would make your code look really ugly. So that's why I decided to separate these two components despite having some similarities. After all, software engineering is all about trade-offs. There is no perfect solution. Here, yes, we have a little bit of code duplication, but I believe our code is cleaner and easier to understand than having one component like input that would support all kinds of input fields. And finally, let's take a look at the two bugs that I have fixed in our fake movie service. So fake movie service. So down the bottom, here's one bug. So in our save movie function, we get a movie from our movies array. Previously, we had the name property here, but our movies have a title property. So that's one line that I fixed. And also on line 87, previously we didn't have this toString here. And with this, we could not edit a new movie. So we're done with this exercise. If you want to examine my code in more detail, you can download it from the first lecture of this section.